You know how a long time ago I promised that Vex explained video? Well, today's the day I do it. So when asking about the Vex, the most common question is always going to be this one. What are the Vex? I'll answer that. So the most simple version of the answer is that they're cyborgs. They're not humans, but they're not exactly machines either. They're more cyborgs, where they're part machine, part organic, where they're their own thing. We don't really know what they are besides that. The more complex version of the answer is that they're multicellular beings that come together and form bodies. These multicellular beings are all distinct consciousnesses. Screw that. I'm gonna leave that in. Screw it. Uh, but they form these bodies. They can be hobgoblins. They can be goblins. They can be these things called minotaurs. They can be these things called wyverns. They can be these things called hydras. They can be these things called cyclopses, and on and on. There's a lot of different kinds of Vex. But they all come together and they all follow this one rule. They are all part of the Vex network and they will always try to contribute to the Vex network. The Vex network is something I'm going to describe later because I'm trying to describe the Vex themselves currently. So let's move on. So, besides all these variations of Vex, we have the higher versions of the Vex themselves. I'm talking about the strongest versions of them. These Vex are called Axis Minds. Now, the Axis Mind Vex are a lot stronger than all the other Vex, but there's a couple buffers between them and the Axis Vex. For example, there's these things called Gate Lords, and that there's a Gate Lord, notoriously, that we have to go and kill in Destiny 1 to go into the Black Garden. Gate Lords are usually the type of Vex that guard portals. They're a lot stronger than other Vex, but we typically don't fight Gate Lords. Gate Lords, we fight them mostly in the lore. We don't really see them much in the story. But we know that the Gate Lords are really strong Vex and are stronger than all the other trash we fight. Regardless if it's a Wyvern or if it's a Hydra, etc., etc. So, that's the consistent answer about the Vex. They are these biological cyborg type characters that essentially time travel, do their own thing, and can dictate rules of the realm. The more complex answer for the Vex is this. Firstly, they are essentially aggressive ideas, concepts, basically. These concepts can be used to take form. These concepts can all have different rules, or not necessarily different rules, but they all have different primary functions, focuses, goals, and they even have powers that are made to do their jobs. It's going to depend on the Vex in question when we discuss this, but now we can actually go into the Axis Mind Vex, because now we talked about the Gate Lords. So, the Axis Mind Vex are these wide range of Vex, and they scale anywhere from the lowest of high hyperversal.
You should now be entering a Hilbert space, if the Taken have not misaligned the Pyramidian space geometric intuitions.
Gesundheit.
I did not sneeze, you fool. It is an infinite dimensional functional space. The Vex often... Oh, why am I wasting my breath?
To being the pinnacle of high hyperversal, to being possibly higher, depending on the character. You have to be an extremely strong Vex in order to actually be that strong, though. Particularly as a concept. So, it goes like this. The Axis Mind Vex are the collections of the Vex network that they're dedicated to towards doing their jobs. how we determine the goals of the Axis Mind Vex are in the name of the Vex and the job that they do. For example, Atheon times Conflux is a Vex time god. Panoptes is a Vex reality god. Argos is a planet eater. Or in this case could also be a Vex reality god as well. So, and then we have other Vex that do other jobs that are depending on what those jobs are, they will be that particular Vex. So, to keep it simple, they're essentially these really distinct creatures that are even considered alien to everyone else within the universe. There are these multi-bodied consciousnesses. I'm also going to leave that in, screw it. And they come together and form these bodies, and that they come into reality via being aggressive ideas. They're essentially concepts that are pushed into reality. So they are conceptual creatures in a metaphysical sense, but they're also physical, causal creatures. But they're very easily able to hurt and damage the paracosm. So that's what the Vex are in a nutshell. Now let's go ahead and move on with the video. In no specific order, I'm going to be going over the various parts of the Vex cosmology that we've seen in Destiny, and then after that, scale all of it. In no specific order, we're going over the Corridors of Time, the Forge Star, we're going over the Black Garden, the Infinite Forest, the Vault of Glass, and then we're going over the Vex Domain, and possibly what's beyond the Vex Domain. So, let's go ahead and get started with the simple parts of the cosmology. The Corridors of Time in the Infinite Forest. In Season of Dawn, we get introduced to a new part of the cosmology. This part of the cosmology is called the Corridors of Time. The Corridors of Time is actually really easy to explain. So, basically, every planet has its own timeline from the past to the present to the future. The Corridors of Time is that history and/or timeline of that planet that allows you to possibly go into other realities of that planet. The Corridors of Time basically function as this infinite 4D type structure that allows us to interact with reality and possibly other timelines, although we don't know if it works in the same way as the Pyramidion. The Infinite Forest, that's also really easy to explain. The Infinite Forest is a reality engine inside Mercury that was born from a seed planted on the planet. As a result, you basically have this reality engine that has finite and infinite statements, with infinite being more consistent, and another statement for the Infinite Forest having endless or infinite expansion. There's not really anything else to add for the Infinite Forest, although it is suggested that the multiverse will eventually be conquered by it over time. For the Vault of Glass, I decided to put it in the same category as the Pyramidion. The reason is a bit more nuanced, but it is kind of simple. So, both the Vault of Glass and the Pyramidion actually deal with time, even though they're separate structures. However, the thing is, when you compare the Vault of Glass and you compare the Pyramidion, you're actually comparing Atheon to Brachion. And it turns out that Atheon, while a lot weaker, has better hacks due to the fact that it has a much more complex priority. Whereas, say, Brachion is simply just a guard for the Pyramidion library. The Vault of Glass is focused around dealing with time and strictly time. Whereas, say, the Pyramidion is this massive library of infinite dimensions that also works as a gateway to other timelines. And that there's multiple Pyramidions, so we know that Brachion is just a guard of one Pyramidion. So, fundamentally, the Vault of Glass should be more complex than the Pyramidion due to the fact that it's a more complex structure. If we need to compare the other two in another way, we can try this. Atheon directly powers the vault, while Brachion, although stronger than Atheon, does not power the Pyramidea, only guards it. So, we know that Atheon is a more important Vex than Brachion is, technically speaking. So, this is the reason why the Vault of Glass should be a more fundamental version of infinite dimensional than compared to the Pyramidion, which houses many infinite dimensions. The number of which you can debate, but regardless, it is infinite dimensional. So at this point in the video, I'm going to leave you two choices that you can make for yourself that I'm not going to force down your throat. Either A, you decide that the Black Garden is still only infinite dimensional going forward and upwards. B, you believe that the Black Garden is out-of-versal going forward and upwards. So, regardless on the conclusion you want to take with the scaling, it doesn't change what I'm about to say next in the video, so I wanted to let you guys know beforehand. But going into the Black Garden, for the most part, it's an imitation of the garden, that the Vex who came from the garden are the ones who most likely created the Black Garden. The Black Garden, for this reason, is considered out-of-versal. We have supporting evidence with the Sanctified Mind scaling above Riven, and that the Consecrated Mind scales below the Sanctified Mind, and they also scale above Riven. And that the reason why this matters is because it takes an extremely long time for the Fire Team to kill both the Consecrated Mind and the Sanctified Mind. So this will go back to how you scale the Guardians, as well as how you compare Riven to the Vex in the Black Garden. So we'll bring up Riven later for a different reason, but keep this in mind for why the Black Garden is really strong. So I'll get into the Vex Domain first, since it's harder to talk about between it and the Forge Star. So the thing is with the Vex Domain is that it's been referenced to something to be very similar to the Ascendant Plane. The Ascendant Plane have scaling in the form of Throne Worlds with the ley lines and the Ascendant Plane / Sea of Screams. The thing is with the Vex Domain is that you have the Subjugated Minds who scale above the Oppressed Minds. Oria scales above the Subjugated Minds. Now, the corrupted subjugated minds, we can always debate on where the subjugated or where the other minds scale, but the point is we didn't see a whole lot from Season of the Splicer. So what we know is that the oppressed minds, which I actually meant to say earlier, sorry, the oppressed minds and the corrupted oppressed minds are either going to scale to or below the subjugated minds. All those minds are going to scale below Korea. Now, the scaling with Korea is going to matter later for something I'm going to bring up with Riven. But the point is here is that Korea is really, really strong. And that Korea was strong enough that the Guardian eventually had to get a fire team level increase just to be able to go in and ransack the entire place. And basically nearly end the Endless Night. So, that is the Vex Domain in a nutshell. It's basically very similar to the Ascendant Plane, but it branches off in the other direction after the Black Garden. Actually, speaking of the Black Garden, we're not directly sure where the Black Garden scales in comparison with the Vex Domain. It could either be its own other place because the Soul Divisive wanted to go somewhere on their own, or it could outright scale below the Vex Domain. Again, we're not really sure, although the Sanctified Mind actually does have a true form since it did turn to stone, surprisingly enough, like the other Soul Divisive Vex. Now, for the Forge Star, the Forge Star matters simply because it's the son of the Vex. What Clovis Bray did is that he opened a gateway to the Forge Star, which was with the intent to try to get materials for the Exos that he was trying to build, that he got help from Clarity Control. The Vex use the Forge Star as an energy source as well. So there's going to be contention between either humanity and the Vex, or whoever's going to have to deal with the Vex when they come through that gate. Which actually is the thing that happened both times over. So we can always talk about that in a later video. But the point is here is that the Transcendent Mind actually scales pretty high. And that I do not want to downplay it. And I do think you guys should probably hear about the scaling that I have for it later, because it's going to be nuts. So anyway, yeah, do not sleep on the Forge Star Vex, and do not sleep on the Vex Domain Vex. They are really strong. Alright, I think it's time I told you guys. I think it's time I ripped off the band-aid, so I think I'm gonna just straight up say it. The Vex have narrative hacks. So, a few characters in the Dreaming City got together, and they were able to create the Dreaming City from narrative hacks. They basically brought the city to life from stories. That's how the Dreaming City was made. All you have to do is show that the Sanctified Mind scales above the Taken Tekins, and then the Transcendent Mind scales massively above the Sanctified Mind, who scales above the Consecrated Mind, who scales above the Taken Tekins. And after you have the Transcendent Mind, then you argue the Subjugated Minds, who scale above the Oppressive Minds, and then the Corruptive Oppressive Minds, who scale below the Subjugated Minds, but above the Oppressive Minds. And then after that, you have Korea, who is the strongest of the Vex we see at the time and season of the Splicer. So, the Vex actually have narrative manipulation, that it scales differently on the tier. Causal or not causal Vex. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get into the scaling portion of the video, and then wrap the entire video up from there. So for the scaling portion, the hacks are not all that interesting. You're mainly comparing the Soul Divisive Vex to everyone else, and it becomes stale after you realize that it's mainly fate manipulation and a couple other hacks that they're better at, because they're worshippers of the Witness. Other than that, it's all stale and it's all the same. So hacks are not all that interesting. For scaling though, the top 5 might actually interest you way more. In the top 5 list, first we have Korea. Korea's at number 1. Korea has a feat of being able to infect the rest of the Vex Domain. Now we know Korea's influence stopped somewhere, and that it had to keep going at a certain point. So it's impossible to actually prove that Korea infected the entirety of the Vex Domain. We just know that Korea infected a good portion of it, wherever that might scale. We're actually unsure of exactly where it scales. So, which leads us to number 2, which is the Suppressed Mind, or the Subjugated Mind / Oppressed Mind. These are some of the true form Vex that we fought and actually required a whole fire team to fight. We actually had to become strong enough to fight Korea in a one-on-one and be able to ransack him, which means we had to get beyond a fire team level increase for Korea. And that we can use the Subjugated Minds as a bar for Korea, because we know that we soloed Korea by ourselves. So the Subjugated Minds should be at number 2, and that the Oppressed Minds are just somewhere behind the Subjugated Minds. Now for number 3, it's another double whammy. It's the Transcendent Mind / the Mini Transcendent Mind. These two characters are the Forge Star Vex. The Forge Star Vex come from the Forge Star, which is the son of their Vex Domain. So they're pretty strong in their own right to be able to concern Clovis Bray and cause a fire team of stasis level guardians at that point to have to directly confront them and struggle against them. So, needless to say, they're comfortably at number 3. At number 4 is the Sanctified Mind. The Sanctified Mind scales pretty high for the Black Guardian Vex, but the problem is, the Black Guardian Vex does not scale high enough in comparison to the Vex Domain Vex. So, the Black Guardian Vex is pretty strong, but they're being carried by the Sanctified Mind in the fact that it has a true form. But the problem is, we don't know if the true form Sanctified Mind scales above or below the Subjugated Minds. So that's actually somewhat debatable. So I'd rather see what happens in the future from the Sanctified Mind. Now, for number 5 would actually be the Consecrated Mind. The reason for the Consecrated Mind is that it also took a long time to kill and it scales directly below the Sanctified Mind. However, it scales above all the other Vex that we fought in the Black Guardian. So it's in a pretty odd spot where it's pretty strong, but compared to everything else, it's kind of dry. It's mainly just this floating, flying goldfish that we managed to kill after we managed to basically bait it into eating a lot of food and having its eyeball shot like it's the Gorgon. So that's not really a whole lot to say about the Vex. The top 5 is pretty straightforward and the hacks are kind of dry. So there's not really much else to say for the scaling. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the conclusion of the video. So in conclusion, the Vex are really strong. They're incredibly strong, being many levels of high hyperversal or possibly higher, with that coming along with the fact that they're incredibly fast and to immeasurable speeds. Guardian scaling is really consistent with immeasurable speed, and Atheon of all characters, who's one of the weakest Vex considering everyone else we scaled here, was able to go up against a whole fire team of Guardians. And I also talked about the Transcendent Mind going up against a bunch of Stasis Guardians. So that's also a really strong immeasurable speed feat for each of those characters. So there's a lot of really strong level scaling here, both with the speed and with the other statistics. Hacks aside, since that's kind of dry, they're really strong characters and they really should not be downplayed. Like Dark Future Panoptes and Zydron the Gate Lord from the Paraverse are really good scaling wise, but they're also kind of ambiguous. All we know about Dark Future Panoptes is that it got the Dark Future. We just don't know how. Just that the Vex managed to eventually assimilate the entire universe and absorb everything. Whereas, say, with Zydron, we're going into Dares of Eternity about every week or so. We could be fighting every other version of Zydron every other season or every other week, depending on what the Guardian does in that week, if we had a discussion on a topic. So, if we had a discussion about Zydron versus another character, the result might change literally just because of the timing of the discussion that we'd have, whether it be 2 months apart or 5 months apart. It's a bit of an ambiguous topic, and we have to be extremely specific with the characters in order to get a discussion value out of those characters. So in comparison to the rest of those characters, they simply just seem a lot more difficult for something like a video for them to discuss. So besides all of that, let's go ahead and get into the finale of the video. And that's the video. If you guys are fans of content like this, please let me know in the comments and maybe drop a like, maybe share the video, subscribe if you're new, yada yada, you know the usual. Maybe share it around your friends if they're interested in Destiny scaling. I like having Destiny debates also, yada 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 yada. Anyway, so my name is Nothing Important here, and I hope y'all had a wonderful day. So I'll see y'all later. Bye.